Good afternoon, morning, evening, ungodly hour of the night, or whatever time it is in your region of the earth. My full government name is Cheeseworth Ronald Reginald John Josh Steve Alucard McDude, and I used to make a webcomic. It was called Rewritten in the Stars, and it was about the most miserable, sorriest prince who ever lived, and a disowned nobleman, who are both trying to flee the country for complex social and political reasons that I don't really have time to explain. I didn't get very far with it, like barely 20 pages, but you can read it on my website if you want to. I'm here to talk about why I discontinued it. So, ever since I was like 12 years old, I have had a very ambitious, very lengthy fantasy epic living in my brain. It has been a constant in my life for as long as I have been a socially conscious person with a concept of free will and opinions on the human condition. At first, I wanted to make a cartoon on a popular network like Disney Channel or Cartoon Network like The Owl House or Adventure Time or that general category of cartoons that are marketed towards ages 6 to 11, but a large part of their fan bases are actually 12 to 26-year-olds with autism. But then, I found out that corporations are evil and will sometimes cancel your show for no reason or cut it down significantly, meaning that you probably won't be able to tell your story in the way that you want to tell it, the way it deserves to be told, and that you'll likely lose the rights to it, so you won't be able to finish it on your own either. After I found out about the evils of the corporate TV world, I wasn't sure what kind of medium I wanted to use to communicate my story for a few years. I had a kind of authorial greed in my soul. I wanted the space and resources to be able to include all of the content I wanted to include, so I knew that something like an indie TV series would probably never work for me just because of the sheer amount of funding and popularity I would need to amass in order to make it happen, because animation is expensive and it takes a hell of a long time, as most of you I'm sure know. For a long time, I just wrote very bland prose about my characters in various different situations and drew them on the side in my sketchbook, imagining, in my mind palace, a very creatively formatted visual novel or an interactive webcomic, sort of like Homestuck, only I will never read Homestuck, and you can't make me. No. It wasn't until my freshman year of high school that I discovered the wonderful world of webcomics. I, of course, knew about webcomics before that through Webtoon, but I was a very casual Webtoons reader, and even then, I understood that Webtoon was kind of just another evil corporation. I'm sorry, but it's true. In that year, I discovered webcomics that weren't published on Webtoon, but on their own personalized websites through the fantasy webcomic Aurora. I became so obnoxiously obsessed with this comic for a solid 6 months of my life. I could not shut the fuck up about it. This led me down the path of discovering other webcomics and studying their history the way some people study film and literature. I love reading webcomics. I even like them when they're bad. I love watching art grow alongside its artist, and in no medium is that easier to observe than in webcomics. After I fell into the winding burrow of webcomics, I became convinced that my story should be a webcomic. I wanted to be ready to make it, though. I even tried making another webcomic first, so that I would be, good at comics by the time I was actually ready to start the project I actually gave a shit about. That didn't really work out, though, because the thing about webcomics is that they take a lot of commitment, so you'd better actually care about the story you're trying to tell, and I am somewhat married to my extremely ambitious fantasy epic, such that it got jealous when it found me sleeping with another story and took over the steering wheel of my brain. After that, I decided, finally, or so I thought finally, on a combination of two mediums for my story, prose and webcomics. Each page would be a combination of prose and sequential art, arranged in a way that was intentional and supported the emotional and thematic subtext of the story and whatnot, all those fancy writing terms. I dedicated my 11th grade year to preparing my story to actually be written, and then, at the end of the school year, I started scripting and thumbnailing, and I finally began putting out pages in August. I cannot stress enough how much I care about this world and these characters. I practically live for them. There have been periods of my life in which I only had one or half of another interest besides this story. It sustains me like water. It's practically part of my metabolism at this point. So why then, if I care so much about it, did I discontinue my webcomic? That doesn't seem to make any sense, does it? Well, there are a few reasons, actually. The most practical one is probably the most depressing. Reason number 1. I developed a repetitive strain injury in my wrist. If you don't know what a repetitive strain injury is, carpal tunnel is a kind of repetitive strain injury. I don't have carpal tunnel, I have something far harder to diagnose, but my problem is somewhat similar. I've been told that I might have some kind of tendinosis, which is kind of like tendinitis, but chronic. People often act like carpal tunnel is always chronic, but it's not. That's only the case sometimes, and it doesn't always require surgery either. You still don't want to get it though, so stretch your wrists. I don't care if you think it sounds cringe, stretch your wrists. My injury, however, is chronic. I've had it since November, and it's currently May as of writing this, and while it's getting better, it has yet to go away. I'm actually able to draw a little bit now, which is what you're watching me do in the background. I'm drawing my favorite wild animal, Leona. However, I definitely can't work on a schedule to get pages out in a timely manner without injuring myself even more than I already am. Even if my injury fully goes away someday, which I do think is possible, I've had something like this happen whenever I've had periods of my life wherein I had to draw a lot, so I think I might just be prone to it, especially because my thumbs are hypermobile. I don't want to overdo it and potentially screw up my hands for life because A, I want to be able to draw when I'm older than 35, and B, bad RSIs don't just make drawing hurt. They can also make simple tasks and hobbies like brushing your teeth, typing, carrying things, and playing video games painful. Again, stretch your wrists. I'm not kidding. It's very important that you stretch your wrists.
Reason number 2. I am a perfectionist. Webcomics are not the medium for perfectionists. There are perfectionists who make webcomics and who have been making them for a very long time and are successful, but they have to be willing to curb their perfectionism significantly and to an extent that I am not willing to. With webcomics, you don't have the privilege of a first draft. Your first draft is your final draft in almost all cases. That is something that terrifies me because if it turns out I don't like a writing choice I made, I'm kind of stuck with it. If I decided I wanted to fix it, it would take an exponentially longer time to do so than if I were writing prose. Reason number 3. Webcomics genuinely just take a really long time to make. With the artistic choices I was making in my comic, there probably is not a world in which I would ever be able to post more than 2 pages a week on the high end, and with the scope of my story, that just isn't practical. The average amount of pages in the chapters I was writing probably came out to around 45-ish, which would come out to about 22.5 weeks to publish on a schedule of 2 pages per week, and again, that's very optimistic. The story I had planned probably called for around 50 chapters or possibly more. 50 chapters times 45 pages divided by 52 weeks in a year divided by 2 pages a week equals 21 years. And like I've hinted at twice before, that is an extremely optimistic estimate. It doesn't take into account hiatuses, my severely wimpy hands, or the fact that I probably won't be able to make 2 pages a week if I also have to have a job, which I will. Artists who are able to make a comfortable living off of their webcomic are extremely rare. A more realistic estimate would probably take me around 40 or 50 years, and I can't even guarantee that I'll still be alive then. I just can't predict what might happen in that amount of time. Reason number 4. This might sound strange, but I'm young. I'm legally an adult, but barely, and I haven't really lived enough life to know everything I like and am passionate about yet. Of course, I have some values that I'm very confident in, and some interests that I care a lot about and that I don't anticipate changing anytime soon. I've always been interested in fantasy and storytelling for as long as I can remember, to give an example. But I've also gained new interests and beliefs recently that I didn't give a shit about before. Over the past year and a half or so, I realized that I love history, that I like being in cities, that I care a lot about city planning, and that I think architecture is cool even though I don't really know anything about it. Most good authors ground their stories in their own personal beliefs, experiences, and worldviews. It's why they say you can't fully separate the art from the artist, because the artist is the material out of which the art was constructed. You can't exactly separate the building from the bricks, can you? But anyway, because I'm as young as I am, my experiences and fixations can shift rapidly, often too rapidly for me to be able to use them to get anything done. As I mature, my emotions change at an increasingly more stable rate, and it's hard to write about a feeling that you just don't have anymore, if that makes any sense. It's like trying to capture smoke in a net. I'm also just not sure if, as I age, I'll still be able to relate to a bunch of 16-year-old characters. I'm aging at a faster rate than they are, and I don't know if I can really manage that as an author. Reason number 5. I've been reading a lot more lately, and I've realized that I am terrible at writing fantasy.
I didn't really consume very much fiction before I injured my wrist. Genuinely, I would watch like 1.5 TV shows a year, only read books for school, play 0 video games, and I once went 6 months without listening to music. I would read webcomics, of course, but only like a few. I was too engrossed in drawing and in writing. And in watching YouTube videos. Haha. I had long since decided that I wanted to read more because I wanted to be more cultured and also because I wanted to improve my writing. But I didn't really get around to it until February of this year when I borrowed a copy of Slaughterhouse-5 from my English teacher, and I read it in a fairly timely manner. After that, I decided I ought to keep the momentum going, so I picked up some fantasy books. After reading a bit of fantasy, it has occurred to me that A, my world building is not very interesting, and B, I'm not good at introducing it to my audience either. See, because I didn't read any fantasy for so long but still had my fantasy world in my head, I didn't have anything to compare it to. My world building made perfect sense and sounded brilliant to me, so I figured it probably made sense and sounded brilliant to others too. Not so. I also kind of just realized that my fantasy world didn't have a lot of interesting concepts in it, or really even a unique aesthetic to it. I don't think that interesting concepts are what makes a story good, even in speculative fiction. I still think that presentation is more important, but I also want to have interesting concepts, you know? And additionally, since I've been reading and writing more on account of not being able to draw, I've realized that prose as a medium of storytelling is just way easier for me to wrap my head around. I'm a very language-oriented person. I like words. English has always been my best subject in school, and I seem to have a natural proclivity for things like language learning and grammar and literary analysis and etc. I'm not really a visual person despite enjoying the acts of making art and looking at art and analyzing art. Not only is prose easier for me to produce, it's just a more natural way for me personally to communicate. So, for all of those reasons, I am discontinuing my webcomic. But I'm sure that some unknowable percentage of you are wondering, if I'm so naturally inclined towards words, why did I make a webcomic? Well, there are about 2 reasons for this, which can luckily be summarized far more succinctly than my reasons for why I discontinued it. The first is that I only read webcomics for quite a while, which seemed to give me a kind of subconscious impression that they were the medium of storytelling, the only one I could possibly use. But I didn't realize until recently that they just aren't the right medium for me as much as I love them. Take this as a lesson to consume fiction across multiple different mediums of storytelling so that you don't make my mistake. The second reason is that I am a control freak, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I need my audience to know exactly what my characters are thinking and exactly what they look like. I don't want them to get an idea of them that differs significantly from the one that I have in my head, which I understand is inevitable, death of the author and all that, but I at least want some kind of method to control audience perceptions, you know? I'm also a contrarian, so I wanted to see how far I could push the rules of comics and the rules of prose to fit my vision. It was my good old authorial greed coming into play. The devil on my shoulder whispering that I can have it all if only I structure it well enough. Well, if I was superhuman, then the devil might be right, but I'm not, as we've established. But what's my plan now? Just because I'm giving up on my webcomic doesn't mean I'm giving up on my story. Again, I'm in a committed relationship to it. I could never betray it like that. We're monogamous. It has occurred to me that I can make a novel with illustrations in it, and that is what I intend on doing. Over the next indeterminable period of time, I'm going to focus first on fixing my world building and streamlining my plot. I want to include more historical inspirations in my world building and world build some actual cultures into my setting. I'd also like to flesh out my magic system. I'll try to make videos about that as I do it because I live to yap and also because I figure it's probably a good idea to build an audience before I actually get the book published, but I'm not sure when those videos would come out. If you're watching this as an aspiring webcomic creator, I hope that you were able to learn from my mistakes. If you also recently discontinued your webcomic and you're watching this, know that it doesn't reflect poorly on you if you make mistakes like I did. And I hope that you were able to learn something from all of my yappage in this video. This is my first time making a video that actually features my voice, so I'm sure I made plenty of mistakes and that the audio quality is probably terrible. Sorry. So if you had the patience to sit through all of this, then I really commend you. I hope my voice wasn't too annoying. I'll try to figure out how to set up and use the mic that's been sitting in the corner of my room for 5 years before I make another one, I swear. And with that, remember to drink water even if you think it tastes bad. They do make flavoring devices for that, you know. Go on walks if you can, and for the love of all that is good and sacred in this world, stretch your goddamn wrists.